Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 14th of August, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today via video link, we have David Scott and Mark Anderson. Welcome to the programme, both. So we're going to kick off very quickly here with the World Climate Declaration. There is no climate emergency. This comes from the Global Climate Intelligence Group, and it was originally released in February. We reported it at the time. So why are we mentioning it now? Well, because a laureate of the Nobel laureate for physics, Dr. John F. Clauser, has decided to sign this. It's the latest Nobel laureate to sign. Well, I just wanted to highlight something that he said at a speech that he gave last week. So let's just have a look at what he said here. The popular narrative about climate change reflects a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and well-being of billions of people. Misguided climate science is metastasized into massive shock journalistic pseudoscience. In turn, the pseudoscience has become a scapegoat for a wide variety of other unrelated ills. It's been promoted and extended similarly by similarly misguided business marketing agents, politicians, journalists, government agencies, and environmentalists. In my opinion, he said, there's no real climate crisis. There is, however, a very real problem with providing a decent standard of living to the world's large population and an associated energy crisis. The latter being unnecessarily exacerbated, what in my opinion is incorrect climate science. He then went on to also highlight this organization, this thing. This is from the Nobel organization itself, and they're calling it the International Panel on the Information Environment. And he has expressed concerns about this because they say that they're modeling this on the IPCC. And what they're saying is that the global source of scientific knowledge about the world's information environment is what they are. They're saying algorithmic manipulation, bias, hate speech, misleading information, deep fakes, and other acts have created global information environment crisis and an existential threat to humanity. So David, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, first of all, his comments, but also this organization, because, of course, this begins to sound like an effort to control the narrative that he is, or at least take control or make sure that the narrative that he's highlighting, the narrative that he is criticizing, is maintained.
Well, firstly, on his comments, they were absolutely spot on and really quite magnificent in that they got to the heart of the matter, which is this is a lie that will make people poorer and will drive people to desperation all across the world. And the nature of the errors that are being built in to government policy all across the world, once again, are so severe that the implications are that the huge improvement we've seen in worldwide living standards, in escaping absolute poverty over the last 50 years, they might go into reverse. This is very serious indeed, and he absolutely nails it. It was a very good, very concise summary of the problem. As far as the IPIE is concerned, that sounds like the single source of truth that Jacinda Ardern was claiming to be during COVID. Is that not? We are the arbiters of what is right and what is wrong. We say what is sayable. Is that what that is going to be?
It sounds very like it to me. So if we're talking about information in the information environment and so on, let's look at some information. This is Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Climate extremes like this summer's heat waves threaten UK imports from Mediterranean, is what they're saying. And they are offering an analysis of the extent of UK food imports from the Mediterranean region, which shows the scale of the threat, which increasingly severe climate impacts pose to UK food security. Now, my question, David, is where does this threat to impact, this threat to UK food security coming from? So if we just put that back on screen for a second, here is a quote from Gareth Redmond-King, who's the head of international program at this organization. And he's saying, the heat wave we've seen in Europe this summer in April would be all but impossible without climate change. Now, I realize that's going to make you laugh, and I can see you laughing in the background. We'll come on to get your thoughts on this in a second. He went on to say we can't simply grow our way out of the problem by producing many of these foods in the UK. Well, that's true, but not for the reason that he's suggesting. He goes on to say, the only surefire way to avoid even worse and more dangerous impacts is to keep global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees C, and the only way to do that is to cut our emissions to net zero. The reason I say that he is talking nonsense here, in a sense, is because, of course, it's nothing to do. The food insecurity issue with the UK has nothing to do with the climate. It is everything to do with government policy with respect to farming, and particularly with respect to climate change, because the sustainable farming programme rolls on apace, and in the meantime, farmers are being encouraged to not produce food in this country. We've got the Sustainable Farming Initiative, we've got local nature recovery, landscape recovery. This is all about bringing arable farming and meat farming, returning that land back to what is perceived by the net zero crowd as nature. But let's have a look, if we look at this organization, the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, look at their advisory board. And well, first name that I see there is Tom Bradshaw, who's from the National Farmers Union. Now, many farmers say that he is pushing the climate change agenda extremely hard. He's doing so to the detriment of the farming industry. Let's see who else is on here. There's Lord Krebs, Andrea Leadsom, the former leader of the House, Lord Howard, the former Tory leader. We've got Rear Admiral Neil Morissetti on there as well. So these are the people that are deciding what our climate policy should be, and so on. So, David, just as before you move into Winchester Council, just what are your final thoughts on that?
The problem with farming in the UK is very much one of government policy, and the government policy is now turning against farming and against productive use of land, as it is in Holland, as it is in many places across the globe, where we're seeing nonsense like growing things for fuel, where we could actually get the fuel from elsewhere. And this is, we can get away with this while there's relative plenty, but you add into this the attack on, for example, international shipping that is inherent in the net zero plans, and it may well be that food security does in fact become challenged. And food security in less affluent countries than Great Britain will most certainly be challenged, because we're going to see the reduced use of fertilizer, reduced use of automated equipment, as these items become frowned upon for ideological reasons. And this will mean people will suffer.
Yes, indeed. But also, as I say, the returning of land, the renaturization, the rewilding, as the term is. But let's move on to Winchester here, David. What's been going on?
Well, Winchester City Council, like almost every city council in the entire UK, is working on its local area plan. Here we see a slide, Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. It's emerging like the creature from the Black Lagoon, it would appear. And you see here all the various aspects of this that they're building into their local area plan. And this governs the planning. This is essentially planning law in the local environment, in the local area. Planning says everything's permitted apart from what's prohibited, but the local plan then comes along and says actually the opposite, that everything's prohibited apart from what's allowed in the local plan. So this defines what will happen in terms of development in the locality up to 2040. So it's extremely important. And of course, carbon and CO2 is at the very heart of this. So you see we have here, again from Winchester City Council, net zero carbon targets and the evidence base they're relying on. And if we delve into that a little bit, we'll see that they're looking to take carbon emissions, what they term carbon emissions, kilograms of CO2. CO2 is not carbon, but never mind. Carbon emissions down for both semi-detached and detached houses to zero. And even on their calculations, you see the capital cost of those homes is going to go up by 5 or 6%. So that's not necessarily good news for people who want a roof over their heads. And we see also the other diagrams are using the route to net zero, which is very, very rapid. 80% of new homes by 2024 are meant to be net zero, and it's all meant to be done by 2030. And of course, we've got We've got pyramidal and triangular diagrams, because we always do, all about net zero. So net zero is at the heart of this. The idea that CO2 is a pollutant is at the heart of it. The idea that CO2 is warming the atmosphere and this is catastrophic is at the heart of it. And of course, as you just reported there, Mike, this is not the case. And many very well-informed people across the scientific and general community are calling this out as false. Now, here we have a video from Winchester Council of one local man standing up and sitting down, in fact, in front of the committee and putting forward a case. He only had 3 minutes, and he did it extremely well, and he covered many vital points.
Mr. Morse.
Some of us find it disturbing that an alleged climate emergency claims that seems to underpin our local plan. The document dealing with the Council's carbon neutrality roadmap states the development of these as being atmospheric carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions, etc. Few brief words about CO2. It is a trace gas currently making up 0.04% of our atmosphere. 96% of that is contributed by nature, not by man. It is at an extremely low level historically on the planet, which is not good news for the planet or for nature, either way, since carbon dioxide is plant food in photosynthesis, and without it, not a single blade of grass would grow, nor the crops and foodstuffs, and not a single animal would live. There'd be no life on Earth. The climate has never been driven by CO2. On the contrary, CO2 levels in the atmosphere follow warming. They do not precede it or cause it. Your roadmap ignores all of this, and is presumably the basis on which planning decisions will be made, as it does the science, that there is no scientific evidence that there is no catastrophic global warming, let alone caused by CO2 or fossil fuels. For your information, the hottest decade of the last 100 years was the 1930s. Verify that yourselves. Climate change is naturally all the time, and human activity is largely irrelevant. Normal human activity. On this showing, there's no justification for the economic and human cost that any push for carbon net zero will cause, and there are no realistic alternative technologies like wind and solar cannot even remotely substitute for hydrocarbon fuels, oil and gas. That is impossible. The roadmap also flags up favourably the creation of 15-minute cities, low-traffic neighbourhoods and other measures restricting movement. These are potential threats to the livelihoods, well-being and ultimately even fundamental human liberties of the population. I would suggest to the Council that regardless of what government diktats, etc., may seem to impose upon by way of the PINS requirements, etc., it is their duty not to follow this destructive delusion. It is their duty and their responsibility to do what is in our interest. Your responsibility is to us, not to the government, the authorities, the United Nations, the IPCC, or any dubious source of that kind. The responsibilities as individuals, matter of conscience for all of you, is to us, to our human rights, liberties, and genuine well-being. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morse. I think there are two schools of thought, and you obviously share a different one from the one that the City Council's local plan holds at the current point. But thank you for your contribution. It's certainly worthwhile hearing. Thank you.
And wasn't that interesting? So we had CO2 is not a pollutant, it's plant food, and Essentially, Mr. Moss calling on the doctrine of the lesser magistrates and asking the council to defend the local community from harmful ideas from further afield. But at the very end, the council said there are two schools of thought. That wouldn't have been said a little while ago because there was only one. Only one could be sayable. The other one was an outrageous conspiracy theory. We're not hearing that anymore. That argument, that particular barrier to discussion has fallen.
Yes, okay, thank you, David. Now we'll be talking a little bit more about the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate shortly with Mark. But before we get to that, Mark, let's move on to the other big agenda item globally at the moment, which of course is the pandemic treaty. So take us through this.
Yes, as I've been reporting, the World Pandemic Treaty and the associated international health regulations are being worked on in parallel at the WHO in Geneva. Lots of deadlines coming up, lots of things for our viewers to take note of, lots of reasons to contact your members of parliament. And here is a very important one, right down the bullseye here. We've talked about this before, that once local signatures in the UK cross the 100,000 threshold, the parliament, by their own statements and own stated policy, is supposed to have debates. And this petition that achieved that many signatures, we're looking at 103,012 at the last reading. This petition says, hold a parliamentary vote on whether to reject the amendments to the International Health Regulations of 2005. Those regs were created in the late 1960s, and they've been updating them as of late. And then moving on from there, this is just the nomenclature that's on that same website, that's a Parliament website. Parliament will consider this for a debate. Parliament considers all petitions that get more than 100,000 signatures for a debate, it says. But then it says the government responded as of the 4th of July, 2023, quote, we support targeted IHR amendments to ensure a suitable global framework to respond to international spread of disease. Parliament may scrutinize legislation relating to amendments accepted by the UK. So that's a bit non-committal and vague sounding, but that's basically how that's shaping up. Now here, we have another important part to add. I recently got on the WHO's press register for a UK column, so now I can attend their press conferences virtually. And I've been trying to do that. Some of the timings are a little strange because it's in Switzerland, but on this last part, it covers another important aspect. This is a press release since I got on their registry. During their last meetings, the emergency committee is advising the WHO's Director General, that's Tedros, on the COVID-19 and Mpox, monkeypox situation, expressed the views that that Tedros should issue standing recommendations provided under the IHR to address the long-term management of COVID and monkeypox, COVID-19 and monkeypox. The Director General decided that the issuance of standing recommendations for both diseases is warranted, and to that effect, in accordance with IHR provisions, is convening review committees tasked to provide their views and technical advice with respect to these proposed standing recommendations. These standing recommendations will cover the same period as the WHO's strategic plans, the COVID-19 Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan 2023 through 2025, and the Global Strategy for Elimination and Control of Monkeypox 2023 through 27. And this is important right here. Since entry into effect of the IHR in 2007, this is the first time that the Director General is issuing standing recommendations, the first time ever, which are intended to be implemented by state parties to the IHR. And I spoke to the LA-based sleuth on the WHO and all this stuff last night, James Roguski, and he said the standing recommendations are a way for the WHO apparatus that's working on this to kind of nudge everything along and get the momentum going the way they want, to get the nation states that are involved, the 194 member nation states of the WHO, to get them kind of in a mode or a pattern of implementation, so as to create a fait accompli, a foregone conclusion that most of the nation states will agree to the treaty and the changes to the IHR. So James sees some manipulation here, guys. And so that's the latest. I'll be going to more press conferences of the WHO virtually, and we'll see what else shapes up. But I would just add that viewers are going to want to call their members of parliament in the UK big time if they're concerned about this.
Well, indeed, and we would encourage that, absolutely. Okay, let's move on then. If you like what the UK Column's doing, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. Your membership is absolutely welcome and appreciated. Or you could pick something up at the UK Column shop, which is shop.ukcolumn.org. But please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. And David, tomorrow we have an interview going out at 1 p.m. with Katie Hopkins.
Yeah, not to be missed. This one, it covers, I think, the full emotional range. I think you could safely say, and it was very entertaining, very interesting, and I do hope people will join us for that.
Brilliant. And then on Wednesday during the news, we're hoping to be joined by Professor Chris Flowers. I mean, we understand we will be joined by Professor Chris Flowers for the news program with Debbie. And just a little bit of background on him. Dr. Chris Flowers, a retired associate professor of radiology at the University of South Florida. He's also worked at other universities in radiology and biomedical imaging and so on. But he has been overseeing and coordinating 3,500 volunteer researchers analysing the released Pfizer and Moderna documents. And he is apparently coming back to the UK, would like to run a similar type of operation over here as well. So we'll hear from him on Wednesday, we expect. Now, we want to issue a quick correction, and that is that on last Monday's programme, Brian was covering the fact that the BBC had run an attack on Gemma O'Doherty and the Irish Light newspaper. The headline there being "Woman abused by paper which falsely said vaccine killed her son." Gemma wants us to clarify that, because we said that, we said it in those terms with the reading out what the BBC had said, but she wanted to make it absolutely clear that the Irish Light paper never said that the boy had died as a result of the vaccination. The paper had said that the boy had died suddenly, and it talked about other cases of sudden death, but hadn't attributed directly the death of the boy to the vaccine. Is that a fair assessment of what the points that she had made, David?
Yes, I mean, the Irish Light newspaper was saying what we were saying, which was there's been a huge increase in sudden deaths. This is unexplained. According to the mainstream narrative, no one knows, and then there's all these very strange suggestions that it's to do with climate change or what have you. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful suggestions as to why it's happening. And the one thing that's not looked at is the vaccination programme. And as I understand it, the Irish Light newspaper was making this point and pointing towards the vaccination programme as an area which may explain the increase in sudden deaths. And it appeared that the BBC is painting this in a false light. Gemma also gave us other information about some of the conduct of the BBC, and we think that's very interesting. We'll be looking into it, and we'll come back to our audience when we have more detail on that. But it seems the BBC are willing to take information from, shall we say, nefarious sources.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Now let's move on then to online safety. And at the end of last week, Michelle Donnellan, the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Tech, was on BBC Radio 4 talking about the current attack on end-to-end encryption in particular. And this has been the biggest argument as the online safety bill rolls through the House of Lords over the last couple of months. I, like you, she said, want my privacy because I don't want people reading my private messages. They'd be very bored, but I don't want them to do it. So that was her trying to establish a starting point. But then she went on to say, however, we do know that some of these platforms, they're hotbeds sometimes for child abuse and sexual exploitation. And she said, and we have to be able to access that information should that problem occur. I'd like to know why she wants to access that information, but okay, she says she does. The issue here is, of course, that this is a front, and the UK government has done very little over the decades to in any way do anything to stop child sexual exploitation, child abuse, the sharing of imagery online, and so on. What this is really about is making sure that anybody that's campaigning or in any way attempting to counter what government is doing, that those activities can be spied upon. Because it's not just, as we were saying just before I went on my 2-week break in July, it's not just the online safety bill that is the issue here. It's also the upgrade to the Investigatory Powers Act. So let's just remind you what this is about. The tech companies will have to clear new security features with the Home Office before they're implemented. So this is what the government is going to do through secondary legislation. This isn't something that's going to go through Parliament for approval. This is secondary legislation. It will be laid in Parliament. And of course, if your MP is not actually there to in any way vote against it, it'll just go through as a matter of course. And since these things are laid at periods of time where generally people aren't in the House of Commons, it's really just a formality in practice. So anyway, tech companies have to clear new security features with the Home Office before they're implemented. And that means that even non-UK companies will have to comply with changes, and that including breaking end-to-end encryption. So it's not just the online safety bill that's carrying out this attack here, it's also this. Tech companies will have to respond immediately to notices rather than waiting for the result of any appeals. Data retention notices require the retention of communications data by operators, and technical capability notices are going to require operators to provide and maintain technical capabilities, enabling them to respond to relevant authorizations through the Investigatory Powers Act. And this means much more snooping on the general day-to-day activities of people, of individuals. And finally, national security notices would require the telecommunications operator to take such specified steps as the Secretary of State considers necessary in the interests of national security. So they can do anything to anyone at any time with respect to their online communications. And all they have to do is yell national security. Finally, the Investigatory Powers Act also specifies that those persons in receipt of a notice or any person employed or engaged for the purposes of that person's business must not disclose the existence or contents of the notice to any other person without the permission of the Secretary of State. So this all happens in secret and you don't get to know about it. Now, we were pointing this out before in July because there was a consultation going on that ended on the 31st of July. I hope everybody got their information into that, and we will keep you posted on what the outcome of that consultation is. And finally, on the issue of online safety, I just want to make the point that Scott Ritter is the latest person to have his YouTube channel or his YouTube presence taken down by YouTube permanently. This is a tweet that he sent out on the 11th of August saying, "When it rains, it pours." The same day that YouTube deplatformed the Scott Ritter show, they deplatformed Ask the Inspector. This is a targeted effort by YouTube to remove/minimize my voice. And those are my guests and the people who took the time to ask probing questions about the pressing issues of the day. Those who are behind this should know you won't succeed. There's a vast social media world out there beyond YouTube. And for those voices who still use YouTube as the primary vector for your audience, consider this: conform or perish. If you're doing a geopolitical show and you're still platformed by YouTube, ask yourself why and be willing to live with the answer. More on this later. Don't know what your thoughts are on that, David.
Well, it's very right. There's so many things are now prohibited by YouTube, and basically they silence the truth. And this is not what they were built to do, and this is not what their user base wants them to do. Ultimately, that will take them down.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Now, Mark, let's come back to the doctrine on the lesser magistrate.
Yeah, I was glad to cover in person this past Saturday, August 12th, Matt Trewhella, who heads up that doctrine in terms of promoting its importance and its relevance. He's a pastor from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've talked about him before on this show. But going to this particular Lake James Christian Camp and Retreat Center in Angola was a very enjoyable experience. And there I am in that slide meeting Matt after his two speeches that day. One was entitled basically, "Where Have the Men Gone?" And the second address was about the doctrine of the lesser magistrates itself. And so we can move on from there. That shows Matt speaking. These are pictures I took to the left, and there's a host pastor, Bud Owen, from a nearby church. He introduced Matt. He's shown to the right there. Very nice. UK Column was very warmly welcomed there. And Mr. Owen, notably, is going to be sending a link to today's show to dozens, if not hundreds, of other members of area churches. But anyway, we do have some of Matt's speech here. I took some videos as well, and we got a couple of clips, and I can comment after each clip.
James Madison said, on the subject of an arbiter or umpire, there can be none external to the U.S. federal government more than the individual state. Our founders expected the states to interpose when evil was done by the federal beast. This has all been turned on its head now. Most of the states now function as what? Mere provinces of the federal beast. Mere implementation centers of unjust and immoral federal law, policy, and court opinion.
Yeah, there he's talking about a very important aspect, and this hasn't been covered before specifically, but that suggests that the doctrine of the lesser magistrates, which says that when higher magistrates fail to do their duty or commit evil, it's up to the lesser or lower magistrates to interpose and stop the evil, correct the problem. And this is a worldview and a system that works very well at mitigating against tyranny. And that quote there about James Madison suggests that Madison saw the states as a primary way or the primary means, the primary actors to interpose when the federal government, which was just newly minted in those days, when that federal government would sooner or later abuse its powers. So it seems, again, and this is somewhat my interpretation of it, but it's pretty clear that the founding of America did include kind of an element of the lesser of the magistrates, doctrine of the lesser magistrates, rather. And the 10th Amendment kind of speaks to that too, where any powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the states and the people. So the 10th Amendment, the last amendment in the Bill of Rights, kind of helps buttress this doctrine. But we have another video clip that gets into another aspect, and this one is about pastors that are too supine and obedient to the almighty state.
Constitution, they're to be opposed and resisted. And when they exceed the limits of the authority they possess, either by what is shown in the Word of God or by either of the constitutions, they are to be resisted. Understand, there was a churchman who said, if the governor tells me to put pinwheels on my head to go into the grocery store, I put pinwheels on my head. No, you don't. He's exceeded the limits of his authority. Men fought, bled, and died for the freedom we have. And who are we to so glibly walk in and throw it on the ground? Spitting on the blood that they shed for our freedom. Extremely important to understand these things. And it's extremely important that we understand them with Christian thought. And that's what the doctrine of the lesser magistrate is.
And there he was talking about something that he criticized quite a bit, and that's the church in general. It's important to note that an important aspect of the doctrine of the lesser magistrates is to look at government not as just civil government with legislative, judicial, and executive, but to look at civil government alongside self-government, church government, and family government. And this is a way of thinking that's almost been lost in our world society, that government isn't just civil authorities who collect taxes and have the badges and the guns. It's our families, it's ourselves in the way we conduct ourselves, and through our church and through spiritual matters, not purely material matters. This is what adds harmony and balance to society, Matt contends. And it's a pretty strong message that's resonating with more and more and more people. So Matt had a lot to say about pastors that were, you might say, goose-stepping to the COVID tune during the COVIDocracy, during the clampdown, and how the church is really, really abdicating its role to call out the abuses by civil government, et cetera, including mitigating against the abortion industry, where that was handed back to the states when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And yet many of the states are still allowing what Matt termed a widespread slaughter that's still happening. And he lamented that, as did the 100 plus attendees at the retreat that I covered. And one other item on this, maybe there's two here, but one other one is that the states that are really implementing the doctrine of the lesser magistrates include Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, and now Massachusetts. And this item here, I'll just kind of cherry pick it. Like Illinois, Michigan, and Oregon, that's another one, the state legislature and the governor of Massachusetts has introduced a bill which tramples upon the Second Amendment of the right to keep and bear arms. The bill HD 4420 is a tyrant's paradise. This is according to Matt's website, defytyrants.com. The bill is designed to turn law-abiding citizens into criminals, but the WARE, W-A-R-E, Massachusetts Police Department is interposing. They are fighting. They are doing the duty of the lesser magistrates. When the bill was introduced, they were the first to issue a statement calling on the citizens to take action against this lawless attack upon their God-given rights. And here's the key, and this happens a lot, and now other police departments are following suit and issuing similar declarations and statements. The WARE Department statement declares, in part, we recognize that the right to bear arms is a fundamental aspect of our nation's history, an essential component of personal and collective security. Important words. As members of the police force, we are committed to upholding the law and defending the rights of our community members. A plethora of unconstitutional proposals litter, that is, this travesty of a bill. And so you see this kind of wildfire viral effect that the lesser magistrates doctrine has had in several states. We've talked about Lapeer County, Michigan, Ottawa County, Michigan, where people that practice this doctrine are now elected to the county boards in those areas, and it's having an amazing effect, as I've mentioned. And that's essentially it. It was a very, very well-received pair of speeches by Mr. Trewhella, and people they came across as very committed to learning more and implementing what Matt spoke about. So this is a movement that bears a lot of watching, and I think amazing things are going to happen from this, from what I've seen so far.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And I'll just mention that on Wednesday, I think we'll probably be we're covering the fact that the local authorities on the UK are going to be given more opportunity to raise money for themselves, not just through council tax. So that just makes that the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, David, even more important. But let's move on to rich men north of Richmond.
Yeah, so people say we don't have good news on UK Column. Well, today we do, lots of it. We've got Dr. John Connor calling out pseudoscience on climate change. We've got the doctrine of the lesser magistrates being proclaimed on both sides of the Atlantic. And we have this. This is a viral hit from a man called Oliver Anthony. And basically, he posted a YouTube video on August the 7th, a performance of his song, Rich Men North of Richmond. The first song he'd ever recorded on a real microphone and a real camera, not just on his cell phone. It's gone viral and it's been a massive, massive hit. We have here Fox News describes it as a blue-collar political anthem. The left obviously don't like the blue-collar workers at all anymore, so Rolling Stone calls it right-wing influencers just found their favourite country song, and comments that he blasts high taxes and obese people on welfare. Well, he does a lot more besides that. And they say he even appears to allude to Jeffrey Epstein. No, he doesn't appear to do anything. He absolutely skewers that one. And we have a short clip and we'll play the full song in extra.
It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. 'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no Look out for miners, and not just miners on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and the whole beast milking welfare.
And it's a wonderful song. We'll talk about it extensively in Extra. It covers so many important issues, and I hope you all enjoyed that.
Okay, thanks, David. Now, let's move on just quickly to Ukraine and more about this sort of media coverage, because obviously the counteroffensive isn't going so well. But let's bring the Messenger News up first of all and look at how they're describing things. So this is from the United States, and they're saying Ukraine is losing US weapons on the battlefield. Heavy equipment losses are forcing a change in tactics and raising tough questions about the future of the war. And the question is, what is the future of the war? And so what they say here is, according to the widely cited open source blog Oryx, which documents only equipment losses that can be verified by photographic evidence, at least 23 of Ukraine's Bradleys have already been destroyed. Another 21 have been damaged, and 5 of those have been abandoned. More than 60 M113 armored fighting vehicles, 57 Max Pro mine-resistant vehicles, and more than 100 Humvees have also been destroyed, damaged, or lost. The value of all this destroyed equipment likely runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. They say the high rate of destruction has come as a result of heavily fortified Russian defensive positions, including vast fields of mines. And in contrast, in the early days of the war, Russia's tactics have also become more innovative and effective. The Russians have been making particularly effective use of Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopters to strike Ukraine's vehicles and tanks. So that's the view from the Messenger on the western side of the Atlantic. Here is the Times, however, and their headline is, Ukraine is winning the war with Russia, but it won't be over by Christmas. So Western weapons mean the Russians are outgunned and Putin is dithering, but Zelensky's counteroffensive remains grindingly slow. So what are they saying? They're saying the Ukrainians acknowledge that the counteroffensive has not gone to plan, and they've not made the progress they hoped for or expected. It does not mean the counteroffensive has failed, as territory has been liberated and Russian forces seriously degraded. A month or two remains in which Ukraine could yet achieve a breakthrough. November is when the winter rains in the southern Zaporozhye region really start to make conditions difficult. And it goes on to say, that said, the Ukrainians still hold the initiative. They are, by any meaningful measure, winning, according to the Times. They have, for example, kept the Russians spread across a wide front and used their new long-range firepower and their capability to move more quickly from finding to hitting targets to degrade their enemies' all-important supply dumps and artillery. According to their own figures, in the last couple of months, they've been destroying perhaps 25 Russian artillery pieces a day. They've also repeatedly struck at crucial Russian supply lines, especially the Chonar Bridge connecting mainland Ukraine to Crimea. And then it goes on to say there's a growing awareness in Kiev and the West that they need to start working on a new, longer time frame. So I don't even know where to start with that, because the Times article is so disgraceful. But anyway, it's just as well that they're now working on a longer time frame, because, of course, the mainstream media has now decided to acknowledge something that alternative media, including ourselves, have been saying from the very beginning, and that is that there's no prospect of F-16s, of Ukrainian pilots flying F-16s in the near future on the battlefield. So this is a Washington Post from a few days ago, saying F-16 training for Ukrainian pilots faces delays and uncertainty, and Kiev wants US-made fighter jets as fast as possible, but the first pilots to undergo training probably won't be ready to fly them until next summer. So David, mainstream media is struggling with the current situation because clearly the picture is pretty bleak, but the Times demonstrates that no matter how bleak it gets, they can find the words to make it seem like Ukraine's still winning. But at least they're acknowledging, I suppose, that this is not going to end anytime soon.
Yeah, it's going to be a long war. Started in 2014. It's a very long war. And we're looking at something that's going to be similar in length to the Second World War, are we? Is that really the plan? Is that really in the best interest of the Ukrainian people, the Russian people, or anybody? apart from the military-industrial complex? I think not. This again shows the empty heart at the in the political sphere in the Ukraine and in the West, in that there is still not a word calling for peace.
Indeed. Okay, Mark, let's move on then to education.
Ties into Matt Trewhella's presentation on the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates in a sort of tangential way. This headline from Fortune, it's not just the office people don't want to go to, kind of an odd headline. It's not just the office people don't want to go to. COVID looks to have permanently severed something as school attendance plummets and keeps dropping. And many people highly critical of the U.S. public school system are basically saying amen to this because that school system, like the legacy media here, and of course much of this is around the world, has been a major instigator in turning education into indoctrination. And that became much more amplified during COVID. Here's a little bit of data that'll round out today's report. Across the country, students have been absent at record rates since the schools reopened during the pandemic. More than a quarter of students missed at least 10% of the 2021-2022 school year, making them chronically absent. According to the most recent data available, before the pandemic, only 15% of students missed that much school. All told, an estimated 6.5 million additional students became chronically absent, according to the data, which was compiled by Stanford University education professor Tom Dee in partnership with the Associated Press. Of course, there's the AP Wire service showing its involvement in things that maybe it shouldn't be involved in necessarily. Taken together, the data from 40 states and Washington, D.C. provide the most comprehensive accounting of absenteeism nationwide. Absences were more prevalent, they claim, among Latino, Black, and low-income students, according to Dee's analysis. The absences come on top of the time students missed during school closures and pandemic disruptions. They cost crucial classroom time as schools work to recover from massive learning setbacks. Well, I've covered a little bit about how they try to teach reading, the very wrongful and questionable ways they try to teach reading, what they call the new math. So massive learning setbacks are hardly the fault of COVID and school closures. They're largely the fault of school policies that have been using wrong-headed ways to teach fundamentals for a long time. And all the closures did was exacerbate that. And now, as we've read elsewhere, and as I've reported on UK Column before, when the pandemic happened, a lot of parents, sometimes for the first time, saw the actual curriculum their students were using from the schools, and they were shocked. Not only was it unworkable, but it often had to do with diversity, exclusion, equity, things like that, the whole woke agenda, the LGBTQ indoctrination, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're really seeing is the public school system, at least in the States, coming apart. And COVID did us an ironic favor in taking the mask off that system. And now maybe you might say the market will correct itself as more and more people who never before considered homeschooling might now consider it. And that will actually accent, you might say, the freedom movement in the United States that the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates is kind of taking the lead on. So all told, this is good news, even though it's a bumpy road along the way.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And David, let's move on to what's going on in the movies.
Well, more good news. So we have here the release date for Sound of Freedom, which is a film directed by Mel Gibson. And it's about the fight against child sex trafficking. And this takes us into areas that the powers that shouldn't be may not wish us to go. This has been released and has been a huge success in the States, and it's released in the UK and Ireland on the 1st of September. And we've also got another upcoming film I want to talk about. This is The Jones Plantation. The description for this says you can control a man with brute violence, but you can never truly own a man until he's convinced that your word is law and obedience is a virtue. This is a film destined to be a cult a cult classic, and at the forefront of American dissident cinema. Now, I know what you're thinking. I didn't think there was any American dissident cinema. Well, there is now, and we have a trailer.
You can control a man for a period with brute violence, but you cannot truly own a man unless he thinks your word is law and that he must obey, and is virtuous for doing so.
We are losing money. A little more every month that goes by with no end in sight. And they can sense weakness, and they are gonna smell blood like a gator to chum. They're gonna kill us both.
Mr. Scott said this man is a miracle worker. I think he can help us. You're a Nick?
Good people, good people. My name is Mr. Smith. As of this very moment, you are now all free. Free at last.
From now on, we are all in this together.
This plantation will run on equality. I have created something called Jones Plantation Credits.
We're gonna keep them up to their ears in debt.
Jimmy Jack will now be in charge of our new security team to protect this plantation and to serve all of you. You two are gonna have a little contest to see who can win the hearts and minds of the human livestock out there.
Bo Jones!
Most people are weak-minded to wield real power. You must be willing to do what most consider unthinkable.
What most people consider to be unthinkable is that men like you even exist.
That's our greatest advantage. As free people, we work together for mutual benefits, pledging our love and loyalty to Jones Plantation.
We are not free. I ain't no slave. They have tricked you into thinking that choosing your own master is the same as being free.
You offer them a truth that they don't want. They want to feel safe.
There's a dark thing going on this plantation.
Every man deserves freedom, but freedom isn't free.
I'm Nathaniel Jones, and I approve this message. God bless you, and God bless this glorious... Toodaloo.
So I don't have a release date for that yet, but that looks excellent, and it looks to ask all the questions we should be asking.
Yes, I think we probably should talk about a little bit more about that during Extra, David. So cool. Let's move on. I just wanted to get your thoughts very briefly on this. Now, last year, the European Union External Action Service, which is their embryonic foreign office, if you want to think of it in that way, the diplomatic service of the European Union is how they describe it. They started a summer course called Quo Vadis Europa. And last year they talked about it being the birth of geopolitical Europe. So I just thought we would run through the topics for this year's Quo Vadis Europa, which is taking place in Santander between the 21st and 25th of August. It's a summer course, so let's have a look at the topics that they're teaching people about. First of all, the European Union and the face of war and peace in Ukraine. Well, of course, they'll be talking about that. Not too much about the peace bit, perhaps. But anyway, let's move on. The next thing is all about EU support for Ukraine. So far, so good. These are pretty much what you would expect. But then we get into stuff that we've been talking about for quite some time. But enlargement and neighborhood, David, the Eastern neighborhood in particular. So the Western Balkans becoming or getting on their way towards the European Union, because the European Union is expansionist and it's heading eastwards. And of course, Ukraine is absolutely on its target list of countries. Another one looking east, this time, of course, we've got to make sure we've got an enemy. So the EU vis-a-vis Russia and its alliance with China. Stick with China here because the EU is concerned about being in the face of China's emergency. And so on. Europe as a geopolitical actor in security and defense. And of course, this is about defense union, but also Africa also about defense union, because David, if you remember a couple of years ago, Ursula von der Leyen saying that, Africa is not the place for NATO. Really, that's where European defense union is a key part of global infrastructure. And then we've got the construction of a political Europe in the face of the fragmentation of the global system. And I thought this was an interesting one because they're certainly recognizing that the global system is fragmenting. I think there's a lot of pressure on the European Union itself and quite a bit of danger that it might fragment. And they're clearly wanting to address that. But I just wanted to get briefly your thoughts, bearing in mind I'm hijacking you because you haven't seen that before, on the choice of topics for the future direction of Europe.
Well, if anyone's been watching the UK column for the last few years, that's exactly what we would have predicted. The first time we ever had music closing the UK column news, it was Lily Marlene. It was we were talking about the European southern neighbourhood and the military moves were being made by von der Leyen and a certain Mr. Tony Blair to protect Europe from Africans by essentially deploying military forces into North Africa. And we were talking about the Deutsche Afrika Korps 2.0, and we finished with Lily Marlene. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. And here we are. It's now, it's now being discussed at the highest levels. How interesting.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Well, look, that's about it for today, but we do have some final slides, David. Let's start off with this one.
Yes, first, over to Canada, we've got a pic of Trudeau talking to a little girl, and he's saying, "You're sad because the carbon tax is starving your family. Would you like medical assistance in dying?" This is unfortunately grimly funny because it's true. But more good news, The Guardian here reports that Nicola Sturgeon's writing a book. It's going to be deeply personal and revealing, even though she can't remember anything when asked. And it's to be published in 2025. There was 9 bids, and Macmillan won it. And Sturgeon told BBC Radio 4 she would almost certainly write an autobiography, even if it was just for therapy, just for myself. Well, that's unusual. Now, it's not got a title yet. No title's been published. However, Scottish political Twitter has come to the rescue, and they have got a title for Nicola. So the suggestion is the autobiography is going to be called Mein Campervan by Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes, brilliant. Well, I mean, what can we say to that? Thank you very much, David. Right, that is all we have time for today. We will be back in 10 minutes or so for some extra if you're a UK Column member. I want to say thank you once again to everybody that has been supporting us over the days, weeks, and months. And we'll see you in a few minutes for extra. Otherwise, we'll see you on Wednesday. Don't forget the Katie Hopkins interview at 1 p.m. in the usual places, ukcolumn.org/live and community.ukcolumn.org/live tomorrow. And otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.